Hello and welcome back to my 10 favorite people. Hope you're doing well. I'm incredibly excited for today's video because every Bitcoin consolidation range this cycle has ended with a capitulation event, and I don't think the one we're seeing right now is any different. We've seen the exact same playbook over and over again. Bitcoin puts in a very quick and aggressive rally, leaving most investors sidelined and forcing them to FOMO in and chase price higher. We then enter a prolonged consolidation and chop period, which wrecks all of the leverage traders and gets everybody used to low volatility and very boring price action. Then finally, the consolidation range is ended with a large capitulation event, which usually comes alongside a very concerning narrative, which wrecks all of the long positions and forces many investors to panic sell, wanting to stop the losses. In March 2023, that capitulation event was triggered by the banking crisis. In August of 2023, the capitulation event was triggered by the SEC suing both Binance and Coinbase. In January of 2024, that narrative was the billions of dollars outflowing from Grayscale. In August of 2024, that was the Japanese yen carry trade implosion. And right now, you could say it's the Bybit hack. You could say that it's Trump and all of the tariff talk, but really it's just a perfect narrative to cause investors to panic sell, causing leverage position liquidations and making everybody panic and make emotional decisions. And you can see these capitulation events very clearly in the history of the Fear and Greed Index. Here we are in August of 2023 when the SEC went after Coinbase and Binance, and that's when we saw peak fear. Here's the Japanese yen carry trade implosion, where investors in both crypto and traditional markets were worried that we were going to see a huge collapse in markets. And here we are once again today. Sentiment is very fearful. We're witnessing a capitulation event where weak hands and short-term holders are trying to make the pain end by just selling their holdings because they're expecting price to go a lot lower. And there's always a very convenient narrative, whether it's Trump tariffs, whether it's a major exchange hack, which really shouldn't have too much of an impact on prices, but it definitely increases the fear and uncertainty experienced by investors, especially if they had money on that exchange. And of course, we're also seeing those ETF inflows. Even though we saw tens of billions of dollars coming in, now that we're seeing some profit taking by the ETFs, that's making a lot of investors worried that we're going to see a lot more outflows from those ETFs and that this is going to send Bitcoin's price a lot lower. And you can see those recent outflows very clearly on the chart here. And this isn't really surprising because most of Bitcoin's corrections have happened alongside the S&P 500. And now that investors have those ETFs in their brokerages alongside their stock ETFs and other holdings, it's no surprise that we'd be seeing an even bigger correlation between Bitcoin and traditional markets now that these ETFs handle so much of the demand and trading volume. And of course, what happens each and every time we see one of these capitulation events, everybody starts coming out with these lower and lower price targets, like Bitcoin could go to 81K, or Arthur Hayes saying that Bitcoin is headed for 70K. And these targets increase fear even more and convince investors that they should sell now so that they can buy back in lower later on, even if they believe in this asset going higher in the medium to long term. And we've had the same thesis for how low Bitcoin will go for months now. We knew it was likely Bitcoin would revisit the low 90,000s, high 80,000s, because 20% corrections have been very standard throughout this market cycle. But I am not convinced that we're going to see the low 70,000s, high 60,000s that everybody is calling for now, because each and every time there has been consensus that Bitcoin has to go back to a certain price, what actually ends up happening is that price level gets front run as all the investors have their orders placed for a perfect retest. We saw that back in August 5th of 2024 when everybody wanted to buy a perfect retest of 45K. We saw the same thing in January 2024 when everybody wanted to buy a retest of 32K. And we saw the same thing in September of 2023 when everybody wanted to buy a perfect retest of 20K. So now that everybody is calling for the low 70,000s and for the CME gap to be filled, I wouldn't be convinced we're going to be seeing those prices, and it's a lot more likely that they get front run in my opinion. And this is exactly why I keep repeating the phrase of being greedy when others are fearful. Could Bitcoin continue to go lower in the short term? Of course, but the lower that it goes, the more tempted I think buyers will be to step in, and the less likely we go to those price targets that everybody is waiting for. And my assumption in a bull market is that Bitcoin will continue to grind higher. There's always the possibility of pullbacks around 20%, and maybe once a year we'll see a large shakeout of 30 to 40%, but those events tend to be very rare, so it's very hard to expect them and plan for them. And my strategy likes to focus more on a medium to long-term approach. And speaking of medium to long term, I know nobody wants to hear about bullish catalysts right now because prices are going down, so only fear headlines are getting clicks. But the SEC agreed to drop their enforcement case against Coinbase. They also decided to drop their investigation on what used to be the largest NFT marketplace, OpenSea. They also dropped their investigation on Robinhood Crypto. And it seems like many investors have forgotten that up until about 3 months ago, it was essentially illegal to operate a crypto business in the United States. And that's something I expect to change going forward. And I expect some very bullish price action thanks to this regulatory clarity that we're going to be seeing over the next few months to years. And you're already seeing the benefits of this new regulatory regime with the largest market maker in the world, Citadel Securities, eyeing market making for crypto, which is incredible for liquidity and volumes for this industry. And the reason they're looking into getting into it now is because they were waiting years for the crypto regulatory landscape in the US to improve. And we're finally seeing that, but no one cares because of all of the tariff drama and the Bybit hack and the fact that prices have been correcting recently. And as many of you know, I believe global liquidity is the main macro driver for Bitcoin, but Bitcoin does follow it with roughly a 2 to 2.5 month lag. It's the reason why we remained bullish in August and September of 2024, even though we didn't know Trump was going to win quite yet, but we could see that global liquidity was increasing, so we expected Bitcoin to eventually follow. It's the reason why we were cautious and took profits at the highs, because we saw that global liquidity was going down and everybody was ignoring it, but we had a feeling Bitcoin would follow. And here we are once again with global liquidity increasing, but nobody cares because Bitcoin is consolidating and going down. And I do expect Bitcoin to eventually follow with that 2 to 2.5 month lag that we've seen throughout this cycle. We know the main driver for this increase in global liquidity is the dollar index going down, and it's officially breaking down below our risk-off region, which should eventually lead to positive price action in risk assets. We know the labor market is still quite strong with a low unemployment rate, so there aren't any immediate recession fears as of right now, and that's definitely something that could ruin this bull market. So as long as the unemployment rate does remain low, I don't have any major signs of concern that would really worry me. We know inflation is remaining a bit stubborn around 3%, and it's still quite far from the Fed's target, so we're not seeing more rate cuts priced in quite yet, but I would rather have a strong labor market and stubborn inflation than to see the unemployment rate spiking and the Fed cutting rates aggressively, trying to save the economy from recession, because that would still result in a panic for markets and would likely still mean the markets go down aggressively. So I'd rather we keep a strong labor market, inflation where it is, and keep rate cuts from happening so that we can see this risk asset bull market continue. For those reasons, my base case for this cycle remains unchanged. We're seeing very fearful sentiment combined with global liquidity increasing, and I expect Bitcoin to follow through eventually, and I'm still expecting a top in the late March to April timeframe. I will adjust those views if the charts call for it, but that's what makes the most sense to me as of right now, based on what we're seeing with sentiment and global liquidity. And of course, the first step towards our next rally would be Bitcoin reclaiming the range that we just broke below and reclaiming 90,000. We still have quite a while until the weekly close, so we'll see if this ends up being a breakdown or a reclaim. A breakdown would just mean we have a longer consolidation period ahead of us, but a reclaim likely means the bottom is in and Bitcoin can rally higher. So that brings us to my portfolio. What am I doing with my positions if I'm still optimistic the cycle isn't over? For one, my break-even stop losses on XRP, Cardano, and Doge got hit while I was traveling, and I took that cash and redeployed it into Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana, and especially into Solana because I cannot believe the sell-off we have seen over the past few weeks. It went from the darling of this market cycle to everybody hating it because of what we've seen with the meme coins. So I could not pass up on the opportunity to buy Solana at current prices with current sentiment at this phase of the market cycle, because I do expect it to outperform Ethereum and Bitcoin going forward, and similar things with Ethereum as well. I know everybody thinks it's over. I know everybody thinks it's a dead chain and it's never going to do well again, but I am still bullish Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana going forward, and I still think they're the big three. And this is exactly why we took profits at the highs and took profits when sentiment was in extreme greed and Bitcoin was trading well above 100K, Solana was trading well above 200, and Ethereum was trading well above 3,000, because we now have that cash to take advantage of opportunities, with Bitcoin being down almost 20% over the past 30 days, Ethereum down almost 30% over the past 30 days, and Solana down almost 50% over the past 30 days. So I did deploy some cash this morning. I do think this is going to be a capitulation event that will recover eventually, and I had to take advantage of these buying opportunities because of my base case that the cycle still isn't over. And speaking of the cycle not being over, for the first time since November, we have Bitcoin back in our fair value region. I was told Bitcoin would never trade below 100K again. I was told Bitcoin would never trade below 90K again, but here we are with Bitcoin back in our fair value range. But because of where we are in this cycle and how beat up Solana and Ethereum have been, I do expect them both to outperform Bitcoin going forward as long as the cycle isn't over. We've seen the exact same capitulation price action for Ethereum every single time. It capitulates below the 200-week moving average. It bounces, puts in a higher low and rallies. Capitulation below 200-week, bounce, higher low, rally. Capitulation below 200-week, bounce, higher low, rally. Capitulation below 200-week, bounce, higher low, rally. Capitulation below 200-week, once again, bounce. This looks like a higher low to me, and the next step would be rally. Could it just fall through and something breaks in macro and the S&P 500 drops 10% and the cycle is all over? Of course, that's a possibility. That's why we have a pretty large cash position at this phase in the cycle, but my base case is that the cycle isn't over and that Ethereum will go higher from here, especially when you look at the Ethereum Bitcoin pair. I know it's very popular to make fun of Ethereum and say that it's dead and it's never coming back, but when you look at its Bitcoin ratio being at December 2020 lows, I just don't know how much lower people expect Ethereum to go in Bitcoin terms, especially if this bull market is not going to be over. Sentiment is exactly where it needs to be for Ethereum Bitcoin to bottom, and the chart agrees with that thesis as well. So I expect Ethereum to outperform Bitcoin going forward, and the negative sentiment and capitulation I'm seeing right now is almost identical to what we saw in late 2019 when ICOs were selling all of their Ethereum. Everybody was capitulating and throwing in the towel. And I think we're seeing the same thing once again, right before we're seeing regulatory clarity and most likely a resurgence of DeFi. So I'm quite bullish Ethereum going forward, especially looking at this Ethereum Bitcoin pair. As for Solana, this is another example of pure capitulation. I cannot believe how quickly sentiment flipped because of all the money investors lost on meme coins and the upcoming unlocks. I mean, we have 6 pretty large red candles in a row. And one of the reasons why I was comfortable taking the cash from my stop losses being hit on XRP, Doge, and Cardano and moving it into Solana is just how mispriced it currently feels with the 50% drop we've seen roughly over the past 30 days, and the fact that now everybody is telling me the unlocks are going to send it a lot lower, and how this meme coin mania that we saw has officially killed the chain. But same thesis with Ethereum. I do think the regulatory clarity we're seeing now will bring more DeFi and smart contract usage, and I'm incredibly bullish on stablecoin demand and payment networks on these blockchains. So I'm bullish Solana going forward. And this feels like an incredible buying opportunity in my opinion, because I think all of the selling and hedging going into the unlocks has already occurred. And at the very least, if this ends up being the cycle top for Solana, you would expect a huge bounce to around the 20-week moving average before it rolls back over. But if the cycle isn't over, I think this is an incredible buying opportunity for Solana here. I know everybody is comparing the Solana Bitcoin pair to Ethereum. I have never seen a consensus view like that end up being right. Everybody was bullish Ethereum all the way down, which is why it just kept bleeding out lower and lower. But now I'm seeing everybody share the comparison of Ethereum Bitcoin to Solana Bitcoin and saying this is just a distribution phase where Solana is going to do what Ethereum did and just bleed down forever. I don't think that's going to happen, because every time I've seen a consensus view like that shared all over Twitter and YouTube, it usually ends up being wrong. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of investors are selling their Solana, not only because of the meme coin stuff and the unlocks, but also because of that Ethereum Bitcoin comparison that I'm seeing all over Twitter. So I expect it to catch investors off guard, and I expect Solana to do very well against Bitcoin if this cycle isn't over. Not to mention, I do still expect the Solana ETF to be a bullish catalyst. I know nobody thinks it will now because prices and sentiment are down, but I do think investors will be interested in the Solana ETF. And if this cycle isn't over, I do expect the Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana ETFs to see a lot of inflows over the rest of this bull market. So I do think that should be a good catalyst for Solana as well. As for traditional markets, we are seeing a bit of a correction here for the S&P 500, but it's still well above its previous swing low, so no major signs of concern quite yet, but it does seem to be dragging down Bitcoin, which isn't surprising because risk assets do tend to correlate. But as we look forward, we're still seeing huge deficits run by the federal government. Eventually, these deficits just keep getting worse and worse as we see the debt exponentially increase. And if we're going to see an exponential increase in debt, eventually the debt gets monetized, and that should increase the money supply as well. So I remain bullish on risk assets like the S&P 500 and fixed supply risk assets like Bitcoin, as long as that continues to be the case. But anyway, let me know what you expect. Is the cycle over, or do we still have higher to go? And if it's not over, how low do you think this capitulation event goes before Bitcoin eventually bottoms? And as always, thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.